Hey, folks, welcome back to the show. It is episode 5 of the Karl Zahn Show. We keep rolling along. We do ask you to like, share, and subscribe as we try to grow this thing. So I get that plea out of the way. Always hate to beg on air. As usual, because we're doing a weekly show, we kind of have to go back a little bit, retrospect, look at some of the major things over the past week. And of course, we have to talk about the bloodbath. It's just so. So, for anyone living under a rock, Trump was doing a rally in Ohio, and he talked about his concern with China primarily. Is building a bunch of automobile plants in Mexico with obviously the intent of building cars there, sending them here. And Trump said very clearly in context that if he becomes president, he's going to put a huge tariff on these cars because otherwise it would be a bloodbath for the American auto industry. That was clearly the context of the remark. And naturally, within milliseconds, the far left was just coming unscrewed about, bloodbath and the dog whistle to Trump supporters that, he's calling for violence if he doesn't win the election. It really has, this whole thing is degenerating into a kind of like there's adults and then there's teenage girls on the other side. So there's half the country, everything is ruled by emotion, this kind of breathless, hysterical reaction to everything. And then there's, I feel like people on our side who, try to be more logical. As I said on the very first episode of this show, that I wanted it to be rooted in pragmatism, common sense. Here's why I believe what I believe, and here's the logic trail that got me here. And to a certain degree, I think conservatives are, team A, team B, however you want to look at this. We're also somewhat guilty at this point because I look at the bloodbath thing and Trump says bloodbath. And in my opinion, I don't know because I'm not in his head, but I'm like 99% sure that Trump knows exactly what's going to happen when he says something like bloodbath. It's not an accident. And to me, it's like, if you've ever had a dog, like a golden lab, and you do the fake stick throw, right? Like this, and then the dog is like, you could do that all day with a golden lab or any dog. I used to do it 2 or 3 times because after that it's cruel, but it really has got to be like the fake stick throw. When Trump throws out something like that, and then the other side is like a golden lab, looking for the stick, and they'll do it for hours. And at some point, just like the fake stick throw with a dog, it gets to be a little cruel. I mean, it never stops being funny, and I'm a dog lover, by the way. I don't mean that physically. I mean, I like dogs, and I like the company of dogs. I feel like 2024 America, I have to do a disclaimer on almost everything. So when I say dog lover, I'm not talking about physical relationship. But my point is, at some point, the right, the left, whatever you want to call it, we're almost as guilty of the fake stick throw reaction as the other side is because it just gets so old. And then, of course, they did this montage of MSNBC, CNN, Washington Post, like all these people, and the many hundreds, thousands even of times that they use that same term bloodbath when talking about an election results, or any myriad other number of scenarios where they use that word. And then Trump does it once, clearly in a economic context. There'll be a bloodbath for the American auto industry, our economy, if China specifically is allowed to build cars in Mexico and ship them over the border here. So it's the fake stick throw, and it's just got to the point of just so absurd. And like I said, I don't believe for a millisecond that Trump doesn't know exactly what's going to happen. And I'm kind of surprised that in the wake of the bloodbath thing that nobody went to the, Count Trumpula, maybe he's the orange vampire. And that got me thinking that, and I could be wrong, I don't think I've ever seen Trump do a rally in a full moon or even seen Trump during a full moon. I'm not making charges. I'm just saying, I don't think I've ever seen Trump publicly in a full moon. So make your own decision. As you probably know by now, if you followed the show at all or you subscribe, you're a regular listener, you'll know that this is kind of adult deficit disorder all over the map in terms of topics. And I want to keep it real, kind of keep it that way. I am who I am, and I'm going to be all over the place in terms of topics, and hopefully that's still entertaining for you. And I still want to make it interesting and talk about salient topics that affect us all. And in keeping with that completely disjointed and unpredictable nature of the show, we talk about Dr. Phil, who I don't know much about, and I never watched his old TV show. I know enough about it to know it's a little kind of National Enquirer, bring out the wife's second boyfriend when the husband's on stage or whatever, kind of a Jerry Springer type thing. But Dr. Phil has been out recently, and I do give him credit, and I think he might be promoting a book. But the gist of his thing is, and we know how the left loves data and science. I mean, we learned that during COVID, right? Follow the science, follow the science. We love data. So there is strong and really irrefutable data that since the advent of cell phones becoming ubiquitous in the hands of young children, teenage depression, teenage suicide, and all these other kind of negative emotional traits are off the chart. And we shouldn't be surprised by that. And I will say, too, as a father of 5 kids and my youngest being an 18-year-old daughter, that I myself am guilty of it. I mean, I've never made any pretense that I am a completely imperfect human being. Believe me. So I never want this show to be taken as me preaching from on high, because there is nobody more imperfect than me. And other than Larry David, I don't think there's anyone who has said, I'm sorry, more than I have in the course of my life. Nonetheless, I fell into that trap, and I think in hindsight, I would say that my daughter had a cell phone way too young. And so as we're finding all this out now, and I do give Dr. Phil credit for coming out, and making this a talking point, because we have to recognize it. We have to recognize a mistake that we made. I think of everything that's available on the internet and to young kids, and I think back to my own childhood, and I used to do a joke, said, when I was 14 years old, if I wanted to see a picture of a breast, I better hope that National Geographic did a cover piece on Zimbabwe. Otherwise, there was no chance of that ever happening for me. And as fate would have it, National Geographic regularly did those cover pieces, and that is how, and the only way, that I was able to see a woman's breast when I was 14 years old. Not saying that the 6-inch, lip disc wasn't a bit of a buzzkill, but nonetheless, at 14 years old, you want to see a breast, you take what you can get, and I would take the breast with the lip disc if that's what it called for. And so I got to thinking about the whole cell phone thing, and then at 66 years old, I started thinking about communication when I was 16 or 17 years old. And anyone who's old enough, or I guess maybe over 50, I'm not sure what the breaking point would be, but if you're over 50, and certainly if you're my age, we all remember like the public payphone, right? And I kind of joke with my kids. I said, when I was a teenager, if I wanted to call my girlfriend, I basically had 2 options: the rotary phone in my parents' kitchen, where everything you said was on display for the whole household. So it was very hard to, work on your deployments or flanking maneuvers from your parents' one phone in the kitchen. And And we also had back then what they call party lines, where every now and then, like, you'd hear part of your neighbor's conversation. So it was very different. So any discrete conversation you wanted to have would have to be from a public payphone. And I distinctly remember, being in a public payphone, like the little glass booth, smaller than a shower for you young kids who don't even know what I'm talking about, in the middle of January, so it's like 30 below zero. You're inside this glass booth that has every kind of conceivable human body fluid frozen to the inside of it, and really would hardly be know what was there. Certainly saliva, possibly semen, urine. Sometimes looked like what could be food. So completely disgusting. And then the other part of that whole thing was you'd have to have like a pocket full of nickels, that, like enough nickels to sink a Hyundai, because the operator would come on every 3 minutes and tell you if you wanted to talk for another 3 minutes, you have to put another nickel in. So, and then invariably on top of that, there would be a car would pull up and be waiting outside the phone booth for you to finish your conversation. So now you have this added pressure. And I joke about it, but I also think, and I remember thinking, I hope my girlfriend is taking note of my increasingly deep investment in this phone conversation, 5 cents at a time, and not to mention either freezing your ass off in January, or if it was July, you'd be in this little phone booth with the sun refracting through the bodily fluid-soaked, tainted glass, and you'd be roasting in there like a peanut. But I do think it kind of set the bar for, you had to be pretty heavily invested in someone or some conversation to endure the public payphone. And I look back on that and think, well, maybe a little bit more innocent or simple time, but definitely far, far, far away from where we are now, where our kids have instant communication with anybody on the planet at the touch of a screen. And I wonder if somewhere between those two worlds wasn't a better place for us to be. So that's my rant on the old public payphone and the innocent times of having to do that. And I do remember, like, many times for, untold half hours or hours in miserable conditions being stuck in a payphone. I also wonder how many unwanted pregnancies were either thwarted or encouraged during those times. So one of the many things that have changed, and like I said, try a 45-minute phone call in a public phone booth is like standing in some kind of Andromeda-strained petri dish, and you knew you had skin in the game in the relationship. It had to be a very important phone call. And the famous pocket full of nickels, as it were. Also wanted to talk about culturally. So this interesting thing happened in New York, and I kind of equate this to parenting. So I used to do a joke when I was doing comedy about people that, didn't have kids. And to be fair, I don't want to paint with a broad brushstroke, because I have lots of close friends who never had children and don't know why. And here in New Hampshire, we still have enough basic manners to know not to ask. So you never know if it's just an outright decision not to have children or other things were involved. But so I have friends that never had kids and are decent people. I also know grown people who never had kids are really lacking in a lot of ways, in my opinion, in humanity. So I do think there is something about being a parent and having children that really changes you, and I think for the better, because you're forced to serve a cause greater than yourself, as Senator McCain used to say about serving a country, or just generally serving a cause greater than yourself. And I think parenting forces that on you. And I have seen young couples that I know, and I see how much they change when they get married, and then from having no kids to having kids. And the joke I used to do was about people who would come up and say, oh, look at you with your 5 kids. What a beautiful family. Bob and I decided not to have kids, so instead we've got a 40,000 square foot house in the Virgin Islands, a little beach jet, a Rolls-Royce Silver Cloud, and my thing would be, yeah, congratulations, I've got 5 kids, an Oldsmobile, and a fucking tent. So that was the joke about people who didn't have kids. But I think having kids really changes who you are, and in a more positive way. That being said, there was just a story out of Ohio, and again, this I think speaks to the culture or something that's lacking. So this young mother in Ohio was just sentenced to, I believe, life in prison for going on vacation and leaving her, I think the child was maybe 18 months old, left the, let's say, 18-month-old child alone while she went on vacation. And of course, the child died of, starvation and dehydration. So I don't know who to feel worse for, the child or the mother who is that lacking in compassion and what she may have endured to get to that point. But it certainly speaks to the society at large. And that's why, as I've talked to friends about politics here and, why I support Trump, and not necessarily Trump, but I support common sense values and more traditional American values because I think they work. And I think we have the data to say that the other side doesn't work. And that's why I think this race, I tell a lot of people, like, put the emotion beside or aside your allegiance to your party. I have no allegiance to any particular party, and my allegiance is to common sense, pragmatic solutions. And this really comes down to like a fight between good and evil. I think it's that basic, and I don't think I'm being dramatic or maudlin by stating it that way. And what's most unsettling is that it's a tight race. And I think it's going to be a tight race right down to the end, which is kind of stunning when you stop and think about it, that between good and evil, we're still like a couple points apart from each other. And getting back to my parenting discussion, one of the most challenging things about parenting, in my estimation, you go through the phases with your children when they're young and all the great years, and then they get into the teenage years, and it can be a bit of a rough ride. And one of the most challenging things for me as a father has always been not to rub their nose in like the "I told you so." So it's kind of the old Mark Twain adage of, Mark Twain said when he was 18, he couldn't believe how stupid his parents were. And by the time he turned 21, he couldn't believe how much they had learned in 3 years. And of course, that's a tongue-in-cheek reference to, as you grow, you understand that your parents, just by virtue of being on the planet for a long time, probably are wiser than you and have more wisdom than you. Not talking about IQ, we're talking about emotional intelligence. And I used to kind of marvel at that because I was a complete moron when I was 18 and into my early 20s. I don't even know how my late parents tolerated my stupidity, to be perfectly honest. And then as I got older, I was always amazed at how often my father's predictions were right. I thought at some point that he was some kind of visionary swami or something. And of course it wasn't that. It was just people who had lived life and could predict an outcome based on common sense. So with that in mind, I have to resist, or I try to resist, when I look at cities like New York and these blue states and Democratic-run states and cities who held themselves up as better people than the rest of us by saying we're sanctuary cities, we welcome everybody, hate has no home here. That whole thing, I have to try to resist now reveling in the obvious and predictable outcome of that stance And so here's what's happening in New York now, among many other things. While we have a racist Attorney General, Letitia James, who is busy trying to confiscate property from Donald Trump for a non-crime with no victim, while the legal system in New York is busy with that, they're overrun with illegal immigrants. So aside from all the crime, the drug abuse, and all of that, which we all know about, is on the news every day. And again, to be expected, if you take away cash bail and you tell people you can shoplift anything under $1,000 a day, we're not going to bother you. I mean, what do you expect is going to happen? But now it's taken like another leap to where the illegal immigrants are setting up shop on the sidewalks, and they're selling food and they're selling clothing on the sidewalk, most of it either stolen from stores or stolen from clothing donation bins. And of course, these food vendors who have no permitting, so there's no oversight on what they're serving. And the consequence, in response to that, legitimate stores and restaurants are either going out of business or just closing early because they're saying it's not safe, like it's not safe after 7 o'clock at night. And I wouldn't be surprised, you heard it here first, I wouldn't be surprised if in the next couple days Governor Hochul asked for maybe another $100 million in taxpayer dollars so we can get right to work on constructing open sewers and maybe importing thousands of goats, stray dogs, and tumbleweeds, so that New York can just expedite its transition into Bangladesh. I mean, let's just get it over with, do it quickly. So, like I said, I don't know that's going to happen, but I wouldn't be surprised if the governor asked for more taxpayer dollars so that we can, like I said, let's just do the open sewers. We already have the garbage, the drug abuse, the homeless people walking around. So let's just go ahead and finish off the transition to Bangladesh, which seems to be what everybody is hoping for in New York City. And as I said, you resist that urge to say, I told you so, I told you so. You don't want to sound like a scourge. But again, from a logical, pragmatic standpoint, could there have been any other outcome for New York and these other cities when you implement these utterly insane and frankly childish policies? It's crazy. Look at San Francisco. All these major stores have shut down and gone out of business, and then the same people who caused that to happen will then say that it's racism. I mean, this happened in Massachusetts where, and I forget if it was the governor or the mayor, said that, a big Walgreens closed or something. I said it was racism. It's not racism. They closed because they're not in business to give stuff away. I mean, it's utterly absurd. And, I hate to say I told you so, but I told you so. And so did lots of other people, because you don't have to be a rocket scientist to understand where this all leads. Just kind of crazy. Like I said, naturally I'm joking, but I also wouldn't be surprised if the governor asked for more taxpayer money, because this is the Democratic response to everything, is throw money on it, print more money. And I doubt seriously that that's going to be effective. So in closing, we have to say, here's what's coming up for the next few weeks is Trump now is down to 3 or 4 days to come up with his $450 million plus bond to hang on to his properties in New York while he goes to appeal. I'm not an attorney, but I think this is just ferociously unfair. I think, and many legal experts think, that he will beat this case on appeal. I do believe that, because I think the whole thing was fictitious, politically driven. There's no victim. The banks love doing business with Trump. He paid his bills. So we all know, if you can separate the emotion, we all know what was really at play here. This was a political witch hunt to destroy Trump. And I hope he finds somebody or some way to post that ridiculous bond so that he can hang on to his properties. And again, excuse me, good versus evil, a childish reaction versus an adult reaction. It's easy to root for this if you're in stage 3 Trump derangement syndrome and just shy of Trump derangement TDS hospice. It's easy to root this on and say, yeah, go New York, take Trump Towers. New York will collapse eventually under the weight of its own stupidity. There's no question about it. I'm almost surprised that Trump didn't make a move to sell or dispense of his properties and just get out of New York altogether and let them finish themselves off, because I think that's what is going to happen ultimately. So I hope everybody pays attention as we move forward here. We're going to really get down to the wire as spring and summer move on and we get closer to the election. And as always, the whole purpose of the show is to urge people to get beyond the emotion, get beyond the party politics, get beyond orange man bad, all of that stuff, and really think about what's best for the country. Trump is certainly not the perfect solution or the perfect candidate. Joe Biden, forget it. I didn't see any way that he serves, and he's just done so much damage to the country. So urging people to think about your kids and grandkids if you have them, think about the future of the country, try to put your own partisan politics aside, and really think about what's right for the country here. I know that Trump is a difficult vote for a lot of people, but I think you can muster up the nerve to do it if you really parse away right from wrong and what's best for the future of the country. I'm 66 years old. Everything, this show, everything I talk about, my involvement in politics, is all at this point for my kids and grandkids, that they might grow up in a country that at least has hung on to some of the values that were part of it when I grew up. America is still an exceptional country that is demonstrated by the fact that everybody wants to be here. But I think we could lose. I think we could lose the country, and I know a lot of people feel otherwise. I watched Bill O'Reilly the other night say that, and he's a historian and a super smart guy. And I don't always agree with him on everything, but he did say he thinks America can recover from this. He's a historian. He's written tons of books on it. And to be fair, he's correct that America has been through many, many hard times. But I don't agree with him that it's a given that America recovers from where we are today. I think it's a whole different set of circumstances. I think there's a lot of different things at play. This is like no other time in history. And I do think we could lose the country here, or a large enough portion of it that it becomes irretrievable. So as we always say, hearkening back to our aviation themes in the show, we didn't get to that today, but we will revisit it next week. Really appreciate your support. I ask everybody again to share, like, and subscribe if you like the content. And as always, keep the blue side up.